Welcome to Viewpoint, the public affairs show with an attitude. I'm your host, Joe Valeno. Today we're going to take a little break from the political season that's going on, as you know, because the election's a month away, and we've been doing political stories. But the topic today is even more important than who's going to be elected to this, that, or the other thing. The topic today is going to be how the state of Rhode Island treats children in its care that they're responsible for when they're vulnerable and they're no longer living at home or cannot live at home with parents, but become what is commonly called a ward of the state. And with us today to discuss this issue and some of the problems attendant to the administration and management of children under the auspices of DCYF, Department of Children, Youth and Families, is a young man, Nicholas Alahverdian, who for many years was under the care of the state of Rhode Island. And on his left is Rudy Cheeks, who is a well-known journalist from the Providence Phoenix, who is a friend of Nick's and has been an advocate and supporter of his situation. Nick, Rudy, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you, John.
You have an unfortunate story to tell that you've been telling for many years to people in the media, and now there is a lawsuit pending. For many years, you, from the age of 14, at least till 18 and 19, you were under the care of the state of Rhode Island through the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And you apparently had some really horrible experiences. Do you mind just generally summing up for us what it was like for those years that you were either a foster child or a ward of the state of Rhode Island?
Well, Joe, I think that there is no better word to use than pandemonium. It was just constant chaos.
You were in group homes?
I was in group homes. I was in shelters. I was in the infamous night-to-night program.
That program was something.
Absolutely. You went from a different shelter from night to night. It was, like I said, pandemonium and constant chaos.
And, I remember an agency in town that I know used to operate the night-to-night program. They didn't like operating, but someone had to do it, and finally it was ended, where a child would be, even children as young as 7 or 8 years old would be in a group home one night, and then the next day they'd be in another group home or in a foster home,
exactly.
et cetera.
And they would spend the day in the DCYF building, not going to school, not going to do any particular things that young adults like to do. It was just kind of... Now,
during the time you were in the care, pardon the expression, I say that with quotes, you didn't get much education, much formal education, did you?
That's correct, Joe, and it was very unfortunate.
I mean, did you go to high school at all?
I sporadically went to high school, but because I did not live in one particular school district, they did not allow me to stay in one school district because of the policies regarding being in a particular school district and having to live in the district. And
you were under the care of Rhode Island for 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I would say that's about right, from around 2002 till around 2007.
And how many group homes did you live in, Nick?
Over 20.
Over
easily.
20?
Easily.
Most of them here in Rhode Island, but some of them out of state as well.
That's correct.
When you consider this situation, Joe, it's kind of impressive to note that Nick, who was not able to regularly go, much as he tried to go to high school on a regular basis, was self-educated, got a GED, and most recently was a student at Harvard.
Really?
That's rather impressive, yeah, that one could, go that far.
You were a full-time student or extension student?
I was a full-time admitted degree candidate at Harvard, yes.
And you're not attending now? Or?
Well, I'm not right now, no.
Right. I'm working tell us, basically, I mean, you have I would say, a long list of complaints about the way DCYF is managed, and I know over the last 8 to 10 years, you yourself have advocated changes and tried to bring about changes. You were physically and sexually abused during your period during the time you were a ward of the state of Rhode Island. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I understand there's a lawsuit pending that you filed in, February of 2011?
That's correct, Joe.
That you're holding the state of Rhode Island liable for the abuses that occurred while you were in the care of Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And most recently, according to an article in the newspaper, the state of Rhode Island wants you to pay back some $200,000 in medical services that were provided to you through the Medicaid program.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So now the medical services, I want to get this straight. They were related to the abuses that you suffered in the programs run by the state?
It's very ironic. You're exactly right, but it's very ironic that they would request reimbursement for care and medical care for the abuse that was perpetrated when they were supposed to be taking responsibility for me.
So you required medical attention then over the years?
Because of the physical and sexual abuse, yes.
Were you ever taken to the hospital?
Many times.
And there were things like x-rays were done and
X-rays.
examinations by doctors?
Exactly.
And there are medical records that exist?
Absolutely.
That
and they've been broadcast on various media channels as well.
And of course your attorney has access to them.
Absolutely.
Now you've been pursuing change in DCYF as well as pursuing your own complaints, valid complaints, it appears, for some 8 or 10 years now, huh?
Right. I started right after I left my job as a General Assembly page at age 14 in 2002.
You were a page in the General Assembly. Wow,
I was.
That's interesting. I was a page when I was a kid too. and in that period of time, you were living in a group home?
I was actually in the Night to Night program, which was a window for the representatives in the House of Representatives to see what was actually ensuing in the group homes. And what was happening was constant fights, constant physical abuse. There were occasions of sexual assaults. It was, like I said earlier, complete pandemonium. And I went before committees and I started talking to representatives, and I even talked to Representative Brian G. Coogan, who was willing to adopt me. But
He was from East Providence,
That's
right?
correct, yeah, former state rep.
So
from East
he
Providence.
advocated for you?
He did, and he actually went to Judge Jeremiah's chambers and demanded a meeting with him and my social worker, and Brian was willing to adopt me, and Representative Coogan was taken out in handcuffs when he asked to adopt me because of Judge Jeremiah's plan in conjunction
Why
with...
was he taken out? Did you make a scene in the courtroom or something, or the
No.
judge didn't like him objecting to things?
No, they just wanted to bring me back to a group home where at the same day my social worker had told the judge that I was sexually molested in, and she had proof of it, but the judge sent me back to the same place.
So let me get this straight. Your social worker was telling Judge Jeremiah, he was Chief Justice of the Family Court at the time,
Judge, yeah.
that you were sexually molested in a group home. Was an investigation ever conducted by the investigative unit of DCYF? Because they do have an investigative unit.
No,
Never.
never.
Despite your complaints to your social worker? She must have informed the investigative unit as well, I assume.
Absolutely. No action was taken because the beds were filled in all of the night-to-night shelters. There were literally no other places for kids to go. There were no foster homes. There was no place for us to go. And not only did that affect our schooling, but it affected our ability to remain pure of any abuse or negligence, which
So,
unfortunately...
They would send you back to the place where you were abused. They would send you back there because there was no room anywhere else. Is that what they did?
Over and over again.
No investigator, other than your social worker, who was your advocate, tried very much to be. You tell me she tried very much to
She was overwhelmed with
support you.
cases. Like
No
all
investigator
social
ever
workers.
came down and talked to you about the complaints you were making about your treatment in these group homes.
That's exactly right.
Then what about the child advocate now? I know we talked earlier about the state of Rhode Island, for the purposes of the audience, has an office of child advocate, which is appointed by the governor, but the child advocate has unlimited power under state law to go anywhere to investigate poor care, negligence, abuse of children, et cetera, et cetera. Did you ever meet with the child advocate of the state of Rhode Island?
I was prevented from doing so.
Now, at the time, it was Laureen D'Ambra,
That's
who
correct.
is now a family court judge. Did you ever meet with her?
I was prevented from doing so.
How were you prevented? I mean, physically restrained, or you couldn't call her, you couldn't call her office?
I called her office several times. I tried to set up an appointment. Judge D'Ambra, and at the time Advocate D'Ambra, was a very caring person.
She was. She had a very good reputation for
absolutely
fighting hard for children.
She's a phenomenal individual who I have the utmost respect for. However, due to the bureaucratic elements of state offices, as I'm sure your audience is well aware of, unfortunately there are some barriers that one cannot overcome, and some of those are secretaries who are just very difficult to get through to. And it was policy of the office to not talk directly to the child advocate. It was the policy of the office to assign another lawyer or another individual to speak with the complainant. And unfortunately, that is what happened to me.
But no one ever spoke with you?
I ran into Judge D'Ambra, or Advocate D'Ambra, on an impromptu basis, but that was the extent of my communication with her.
But your case was never formally accepted by her office. It's something to be looked into and to be resolved one way or the other.
Right. There were several cases that I wanted to bring to her attention, not just on my behalf, but on the behalf of the other kids that I was living with, and some of whom were beating me up. I was still going to try to advocate for those same individuals as well. So I was kind of in between a rock and a hard place, if you will.
Now, recently you told me the other day that the Governor Carcieri, I think, appointed a new child advocate, and Governor Chafee has continued that person.
Her name is Regina Marie Costa-Gibbs, former DCYF employee.
Her name is Costa-Gibbs, her last name?
Regina Marie Costa-Gibbs.
Now, I understand she was a long-term employee of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families.
She has a master's in social work and a law degree.
So I have a master's in social work, so I should feel a kinship to her, but you're telling me that you don't think there's been much of a change. She was a long-term employee of DCYF, so she must know that system well.
And as I said during her confirmation hearing before the Senate, I told the Senate that basically, you know what, if this woman is qualified to be the child advocate, to be one of the most powerful individuals that acts in the interest of children in state care, the state's most vulnerable population, why should we accept her as child advocate if she worked at DCYF for so long and didn't provoke any change?
And also the fact that you already had two very excellent child advocates in Laureen D'Ambra and Jametta Alston.
I interviewed Jametta Alston twice. She's very good.
They were very, very good. All reports are that they were wonderful, but they were unable to help because of bureaucratic, red tape and other kinds of blockage. This sounds more and more like the old Soviet Union.
It's an extreme comment, but you may have a point. Jametta Alston, of course, was pursuing the case in federal court against the department. She was
in association with Children's Rights of New York City.
Allied with the National Child Welfare Association.
Children's Rights Incorporated.
And of course, recently, I think under Governor Chafee, Carcieri turned his back on that. He didn't want that case, and Governor Chafee now has apparently didn't want to get involved. And Ms. Costa-Gibbs has now, it was in the paper about a month and a half ago, they're not pursuing, the state is no longer going to be a part of that case.
That's correct.
The Child Advocate's Office, is no longer going to be a part of the case that pursues the conditions at DCYF.
And if you're a fan of child abuse, which I hope you're not,
well, I certainly am not.
Absolutely, then that's great. But in this case, it's detrimental to improving the state's welfare system.
Because that's a side issue to your situation, but it shows you, it is indicative of what the attitude is.
Absolutely.
About looking into what apparently are complaints about the way DCYF is. Now, we know that the workers are overwhelmed. I know from my own personal experience of knowing workers, and I know union leaders, and we've talked. And we know that, they're just short of personnel all the time. But what I'm mostly concerned about is that your case was a continuing process of abuse, and no formal investigation was ever undertaken.
That is true, Joe.
Now tell us what Judge Jeremiah eventually did to resolve your dilemma when you complained to the court.
Well, I was sent out of state. And
say that again, please.
I was sent to Nebraska and to Florida.
To put in group homes and far away from where I live.
These weren't group homes. I mean, that's a misnomer. They were basically prisons without bars. Yeah. There was barbed wire in one particular facility.
Really?
Yes.
And you were locked down all the time.
You couldn't get out, number one. Number two, you couldn't call your DCYF social worker, your lawyer, the cops when you were assaulted. You couldn't petition the courts for redress of grievances. You couldn't call your state legislators, and you could not call anyone of any import that could have helped you.
What were the age groups of other people, of other youngsters that were there?
14 to 18.
And how many were in this one facility? Say, let's look at
60.
Nebraska. How many?
Well, in this particular division of that particular corporation, there were about